We're going to demonstrate the basic techniques of salad here. My assistant is filling the mannequin with simulated airway contaminant. We're using that's good enough, James. It's simulated airway contaminant made from a concentrate for artificial blood from the US Anaesthesiologist company of United States. I'm going to start with an overhand grip, and what I'm going to do is simultaneously evacuate the airway contaminant from the pharynx of the mannequin, and I'm going to use the suction as a tool in order to distract the lower mandible, contain the tongue into the floor of the mouth and into the thyromental distance of the mannequin. This is going to allow me to do an easy insertion of the laryngoscope blade, hugging the base of tongue, staying above the posterior pharyngeal wall, staying above the palate, so that I allow gravity to have the residual airway contaminant pool to the gravity-dependent posterior pharynx. If I scrape the posterior pharyngeal wall as I'm coming around the base of the tongue with the laryngoscope, what will happen is I'll pick up airway contaminant, in this case artificial blood, onto both the light source as well as the video source. And I'll have to stop, remove that, wipe that off, and begin again. As we know, in emergency airway management, time is critical. I'm going to show you some techniques to save you some substantial amount of time. I'll begin now by focusing on the oral pharynx. As we see, both with the laryngoscope as well as our exterior cameras, I have an entirely full mouth of airway contaminant made out of artificial blood. I'm going to begin to suction, and as you can see, I'm coming in. If I have active CPR in progress, I'll turn my catheter a little bit more laterally this way so that I can stay out of the way of the rescuers doing CPR. I'm going to evacuate progressively to the posterior palate. We're beginning to see the uvula now come into view. I'm going to do this very, very slowly. Don't take this as the speed at which I would do this clinically. Obviously, I'd be doing this much faster, but how can you learn anything if I do this too quickly, right? So here we go. James has given me a couple pumps on the airway contaminant lever over there. I'm seeing the tip of the epiglottis. As I see the tip of the epiglottis, I want to stay against the base of tongue. I want to stay against the base of tongue, and I want to go into the vallecula. I'm going to drain the pharynx. Now, I didn't show you how I use the suction catheter to help me put the laryngoscope in, so let me back up and do that for a moment. James, fill her up again, would you, bud? And that's good enough, dude. Okay, here we go. What I'm going to do is not only just suction, but you're going to see me actually use this like a laryngoscope, where I push and lift. Now I'm compressing the tongue into the thyromental gap, and I'm distracting the lower mandible, so I'm actually opening the mouth. I'm going to use a hybrid sort of overhand insertion method, now the standard insertion. And now, as I'm going to release the pressure onto the laryngoscope, now I've got a view of the hypopharynx. What I'm going to do is several very simple and easy to understand techniques in order to understand how to maintain airway decontamination. James, give me 3 pumps on the handle here. The reason I would want to leave the suction in during the intubation attempt is in the case of continuing airway contamination. If I'm not careful and I take the suction out, give me 3 pumps, 4 pumps, I'll have, that's it. I'll have a completely soiled airway, and now as you can see on the video monitor, I can't see the larynx at all. This would be a completely blind intubation. So how am I to manage this? If I leave the suction catheter on the right side of the laryngoscope, it's going to produce a problem where I now have difficulty of tracheal tube delivery. How am I going to leave the suction catheter in the mouth while I do tracheal tube delivery? There's 2 sides to the blade. I'm going to take advantage of the left side of the laryngoscope blade. I'm going to remove the catheter and place it down the left margin of the laryngoscope blade. So James, give me 3 pumps on the handle. And as you can see, what's happening now is that my suction catheter is taking up the lion's share of the airway contaminant. My next maneuver to create room for tracheal tube delivery, I've called the salad poke. With a single index finger, I can change the course of airway management. I simply place it into the pharynx alongside the right margin of the laryngoscope blade, and what I'm doing essentially is a dilatation maneuver. not too much unlike when you're placing central lines. You don't try to place a central line over a guide wire without dilating. Why are you putting a tracheal tube into a patient without essentially determining and establishing space for tracheal tube delivery? With the removal of the salad poke finger, I'm just going to place the bougie. The bougie goes in, the tail comes out of the bougie, and the tube goes in. If you're using bougies, it is quite possible to get away without a salad poke, but I think you're really asking for trouble because you might have to use a stylet, or things just might not work out your way. As you can see, if I limit my space for tracheal tube delivery, what actually can happen is I can see what I want and I can't get it. That is like the biggest complaint with using video laryngoscopy. You can see it, but you can't have it. Why don't you do what we do in America? We have it all. We stick our finger in, and we get what we want. Now I'm going to release the tail, and now I'm going to advance the tube. And the most important part of this that you'll see on the video monitor is if I place the tube just in the neutral position, I can't get it in necessarily because there's a left cut bevel on this tracheal tube. It is going to increase some space between the bougie and the tip of the leading bevel, and it's going to trap the right corniculate. The larynx is shaped like a gorgeous large-mouth ice cream cone. It has a very large raised back portion, and it narrows to an anterior dished-out scalped portion. If you don't left turn the bougie, I call this, according to what a motorcycle rider might call it, I call it roll on the power. As you advance the tube, roll on the power. Yeah. What I can now do is I can trap the tracheal tube with my thumb, and I can take my own bougie out because I took my time and I rolled on the power. Now I have a contaminated airway. Do I want to ventilate this airway? I think I want to suction it before I ventilate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take my video laryngoscope out, and I'm going to run a flexible suction catheter down this tracheal tube. This is a nice big juicy 18 French suction catheter. The bigger the better. Notice that I'm leaving the rigid suction catheter in and transferring it over to the flexible. Why did I do that? I'm not assuming I'm going to have a lot of help when I do this, and if I disconnect this prematurely, gravity for some reason increases its force during airway management and everything ends up on the ground. If I do it this way, I don't lose anything. And I place my finger over this and I drain the lungs and I draw this out of the patient. And now I can ventilate my patient, inflate my cuff the whole bit. I should have inflated the cuff before that, but I'm not going to do that in this demonstration.